Hello and welcome to The Point, another exciting program, and today we're going to be talking about the systems in the human body. And joining me, Dr. Laura, is Dr. Richard Kent. Hello, Richard.
Hello, lovely to be here with you.
So today we're going to be talking about the various systems that God has created in the human body, and I so look forward to hearing what you have to say about that.
I hope you're going to interrupt me because I'm much more interested in what you've got to say, because I'm retired and you're a practicing GP, so you've got much more interesting things to say than I have.
All right, Richard, you're giving me permission then. So God has done amazing things in our body, and we have so many systems that work individually and together.
Absolutely.
To make up a system. And we're going to go first of all to Richard's fun facts to find out a little bit more about one of the systems that God has created and how it all works together. See you back shortly.
Hello, my name is Richard Kent. Today I'd like to talk about something rather different. Talk about hummingbirds, which I like to think of as God's tiny little miracles. You'll be seeing a video now of hummingbirds taken in slow motion. Now they're called hummingbirds because you can hear a hum as their little wings beat at 50 times a second. They make quite an audible hum. Now these little birds, they're about the size of your little finger. They are most attractive little things. They are quite unlike other birds. They can hover, they can go backwards, forwards, upwards, sideways, down. They can fly very fast. They can fly up to 60 miles an hour. But they can hover in one position because their wings move completely different to all other birds that we know about. Now most birds, when they beat their wings, there's an upstroke and a downstroke. The lift for all birds is provided in the downstroke, and in the upstroke the feathers move apart so that the air can actually get through the feathers. This is quite different from what happens in the case of a hummingbird. The hummingbird has very, very strong pectoral muscles on its chest wall, and the upstroke is just as powerful as its downstroke. The little wings move in a figure of 8 movement, a bit like rowing if you like, so they can move backwards, forwards, upwards, sideways and hover in mid-air, and they put their very long beaks down very deep flowers so that they can sip nectar, which is a sugary solution from the flowers. They need to eat the whole body weight of nectar every single day because they have the highest metabolic rate of all known living organisms. They have a fantastically high metabolic rate. If you or I were, this is quite ridiculous, but if you or I were to eat as much as they eat, we would eat 1,350 hamburgers a day and not put on weight. They eat prodigious amounts of nectar. Now sometimes they come across flowers where the nectar is too deep and they've got a tongue which is as long as their very long beaks and will come out and suck the nectar out through special little grooves in the tongue. Their skeletons are extremely light, very, very light. They have a very, very low body mass index. And yet, although they are so tiny, it's no problem at all for a hummingbird to fly 500 miles across the Gulf of Mexico using its extraordinary navigation equipment. They have hummingbirds, they navigate using obviously the sun. The hummingbirds can detect plain polarized light, so they can see the sun even if it's cloudy. They have special iron oxide in their beaks and in their middle ears, in the semicircular canals, and also in the retina of their eyes. These are truly miraculous little birds. They are tiny, and they are so extraordinary that the military have studied hummingbirds to see how they actually can fly so well. They're actually more like helicopters than planes. So these are truly little miracles, and I know that the evolutionists like to think that these evolved, but I defy any evolutionist to explain how a hummingbird could possibly evolve. It is so cleverly designed. Thanks for listening, and God bless you.
Welcome back to Health in To the Point, not Health in Focus. That was a slip of the tongue, Richard. No, it is to the point. And that was absolutely fascinating, wasn't it, Richard? Absolutely Now, a lot of you may not know about hummingbirds in the UK because they're not naturally found in the UK, are they, Richard? They're usually in America, USA and South America, so it must be quite interesting for a lot of you to know what hummingbird is like. But we're taking the creation of the hummingbird, which is so unique and so fascinating. Can you imagine eating 135 hamburgers a day? That's incredible, isn't it? But that's how much energy, then how many calories they burn, literally.
They actually, their temperature goes up to 103 Fahrenheit, and at night time they have what's called a torpor. Their temperature, body temperature, falls down to about 85 Fahrenheit. If you and I, our viewers, if our temperatures went down to 85, we'd be dead of hypothermia, but they do it every night. They're extraordinary. If our temperatures went up to 103, we would fit and die, wouldn't we? But they do it all the time. Their temperatures are all over the place.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, you know, we need to obviously explore more about this because you'd like to actually talk about the systems in the body as well, in the human body, and how they work so well. So over to you. Let's hear a little bit more. We're talking about the respiratory system, cardiovascular system, and how God has intricately worked all these things out. If you can do something as amazing like that in the hummingbirds, how much more us more complex, more amazing, more magnificent human beings, eh?
Oh, well, absolutely. Well, I'll go through the various systems in the human body, Laura, but please, Dr. Laura, the practicing GP, unlike me, please interrupt because you see all this stuff all the time. So let's have a look at the first slide. Now, the first slide appropriately is an image of what Jesus may have looked like. In the beginning was the Word, says the book of John, chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. All things were made by him, nothing was made without him. In him was life. So everything was made by Jesus Christ, who's described in the book of John as the Word, and also in the book of Revelation as the Word. And he's the author of life. And he designed everything in our human bodies and hummingbirds as well, and also all the plants, all the animals, all the birds, all the fish, everything living that we see around the planet. He actually, by the way, designed the universe as well. And incidentally, just to throw it in, everyone thinks that Jesus was a carpenter. Actually, he wasn't. He was a tekton in the original Greek, which means he was a builder. We get that from the English word architect. Which means master builder, because he built the universe and then he created us, then he created everything else at the same time. But when he created us, if anything, we are even more miraculous than the hummingbird. So let's look at the human body. Now, when we were conceived in secret in our mother's womb, according to the book, to the psalmist, what actually happened was 23 chromosomes from our mum came together with 23 chromosomes from our dad to make 46 chromosome, which is the genome. And in that genome, which is comprised of 4 amino acids, is all the genetic information for all of the cells in our human body. Now just think about that. We've got 100 trillion cells, and every single cell is different. That DNA is absolutely stunning. It's remarkable because the single cell at conception, a conceived cell, has all the information for all the different 100 trillion cells in our human bodies. Just need to concentrate just on just say the human eye. In the human eye, you've got lots of different cells. You've obviously got the cornea, you've got the iris. Oh, there we are. There's the human eye. Well, you've got the eyelashes, the eyelids. That's the window wipers, by the way. And then the lacrimal glands, and then you've got the iris, and then the ciliary muscles to make the iris contract, and then you've got the lens, and then you've got the vitreous and the aqueous humor, and then you've got the rods and the cones and the optic nerve, and that's to start with. And all of those cells are all completely different, and all that genetic information is all on the DNA, the deoxyribonucleic, in the genetic code in the first single cell when we were conceived in our mother's womb 9 months before we were born. What do you think of that, Laura?
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing.
It is amazing.
And when they work well, they work absolutely wonderfully well, because we know, from my point of view, I get to see when things don't work very well, so cataracts and double vision and glaucoma, and of course those are all because the different parts of the eye, the aqueous humor, the pressure in the eye, are not working properly. Cataracts because the lens becomes opaque, etc., etc., or blepharitis, conjunctivitis. But yes, isn't it amazing? And it makes us realise just how well they work, because when they don't work so well, it affects everything, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, I haven't actually finished everything I was going to say about the eye. I was using the eye as an illustration. So if we just see the eye again, the thing is, our eyes, we've got two eyes, of course we all know that, and we see in stereoscopic vision. But the thing is, without going into the details of the actual anatomy of the eye, the point is that the light is actually photons moving in a waveform, and that the light is concentrated on the fovea, which is the highly concentrated area at the back of the retina, where lots of rods and cones are concentrated in order so that we can see best with our fovea. Now, the point is that your eyes actually scan. If you're you're currently looking at a television, I suspect, or you might be looking at a computer, but you might be moving in a car, or you might be moving at an aeroplane. Now, in the studio where we are right now, there are 4 cameras, but they're stationary. Now, your human body, especially if you're in a car, or especially if you're in an aeroplane, you could easily be traveling at 350 miles an hour. That's very unusual for a static camera in a television studio. At 350 miles an hour in an airplane at 35,000 feet, you don't have any problem at all in focusing on clouds or sea below or anything else. Or if you're traveling in a car at 70 miles an hour and you go on a motorway, you don't have any problem at all reading what it says on the gantry about the approaching fog or whatever it is they're telling you about the speed limits or whatever it is. The point is they're moving cameras and they're scanning together, they're scanning everything about 1 million times a second. People don't know that, but your eyes are actually scanning everything about 1 million times a second. They are truly remarkable. They're far more sophisticated than any camera that man has ever created, and they couldn't possibly have evolved. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. Absolutely. I think God is just blows our mind with the way He's created us. Yeah. And each of the systems need to be together at the same time, not evolving thousands of years after each other. It just wouldn't work. Nobody would survive. I mean, the primordial whatever creature would not survive having to evolve the cones at different times from the rods, or the lens at a different time from the cornea. It just will not come together somehow.
Wonderfully said. The magic word is irreducible complexity, because you either have an eye that works and you can see, or it doesn't work and you won't survive. Right, let's look at the next picture, next system. Now, I wanted to talk about the nervous system. Of course, the brain at the top there is your central processing unit in computer terms. But I want to tell you something you probably didn't know, is that if you were to have a map of the telephone system on planet Earth. Now, imagine all the landlines on planet Earth, the ones that go from here to Sydney, from Sydney to Moscow, and all the other ones. And then you include on that all the mobile networks from here to Moscow and here to Sydney and all the other places in between, and all the orbiting satellite systems, and drew that on a map. That would be about 1/4 of the size of the human nervous system. That's to give you an idea of the size of the human nervous system. It's absolutely massive. The next thing I want to tell you about the nervous system is that we have nerve cells with axons. Those little thin green things there are called axons. They're nerve cells. Now the impulses travel along those axons at 250 miles an hour. And I want to tell you how the impulses travel. It is absolutely remarkable. You see, in our homes, or even in a television studio, we actually have electrons moving in a copper wire, or a wire made of something, but very often copper. Basically, all that happens is you have a negative and a positive pole generated by the power station, and electrons move along the copper wire from the positive to the negative, and that's how it works. Actually, that's very simple, but that's not how God does it. Oh, no, no, no. God has what's called a semi-permeable membrane. Then if we can just go back to that picture with the little green wires, if you like, that wiring is quite different. What actually you have is the periphery, or the outside of the axons, is what's called semi-permeable, is a semi-permeable membrane. And what actually happens is it's the inside of the cell has a negative charge compared with the outside of minus 40 millivolts. And what actually happens is that the sodium cells come into the cell, which cause an action potential, and then potassium cells go out of the cell to reverse the action potential. So actually how God actually conducts electricity is about the most complex way you could possibly imagine, by the outside of the axon becoming semi-permeable to sodium and potassium atoms at 250 miles an hour. Laura, can you imagine anything more complex than that?
Well, do you know, I think you should teach physiology.
Oh.
I think you should get a job as a teacher, and seriously, in a medical school, and teach physiology, because even just listening to you takes me right back to learning physiology of the nervous system. It's just wonderful. So thank you.
I know, but the thing is that I was taught physiology, and so were you, but they taught it from a sort of a natural point of view. They didn't bring God into the equation. But I mean, if you just think about it, there's no chance whatever that could have evolved.
Absolutely not.
Either you have a nervous system that works or it doesn't. If you haven't got a semi-permeable membrane, you don't conduct electricity and you don't work. End of.
Totally.
Let's look at the next picture. See what system we're going to go to. Well, we all need to hear. Now, the human ear is unbelievable. It's actually three parts. We've got an outside trumpet called a pinna, or you might, well, just looks like an ear, really. Then you have an ear, what you probably call the ear hole, but actually it's called the external auditory meatus. And then a little tympanic membrane, which you probably call the eardrum, which is it's held taut by the smallest muscle in the body, the tympani muscle. But anyway, what sound actually is vibrations in the air pressure, and it causes the tympanic membrane to vibrate. Now, there are three tiny little bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes, the tiniest bones in the body, which actually magnify the oscillations of the tympanic membrane times 22 to then oscillate on the oval window. On the green part, the middle ear, oscillates on the oval window, which is the first part of the basilar membrane, which is how you actually hear, and it's like a harp. Now, to explain how that works, if I were to have a tuning fork and strike a tuning fork with middle C, the part of the basilar membrane with hairs corresponding to vitamins to middle C vibrate and cause an electrical frequency in middle C to go along the auditory nerve to the cerebral cortex to be discerned as stereoscopic sound. Now, that is unbelievably complex, and it couldn't possibly have evolved. What do you think, Laura?
Yeah, again, I agree. I don't want to sound like a yes woman, but it's absolutely true. I totally agree.
Yeah,
this could not.
Where do you begin to evolve that?
Yeah,
it's garbage. It's such garbage.
Even if human beings try to recreate the same system, which they can't really. And hearing aids are fantastic because we know the anatomy and physiology of the ear, but it doesn't actually recreate the ear. Even if they could, think about the size that they would need to put all those things together, the ossicles, how tiny they are, the stapes, and how big this particular organ would actually turn out to be if we tried to create it.
I know. Well, we're running out of time, so let's look at the next system and see what Dr. Laura has to say about the cardiovascular system. Full of blood, and each blood cell travels around the body in 1 minute and contains hemoglobin, which is a totally supernatural thing, contains iron, which is, by the way, toxic to the human body. But the reason blood is red is because of the iron in it. Anyway, you've got a pump. It's not any ordinary pump like your central heating pump or even the pump in your car. No, this is actually 4 different pumps all together with very, very complicated valve system and an even more complicated bundle of His, which is the electronic system of making sure that the different atria and ventricles contract and relax at different times. And you've probably seen an ECG with a PQRST complex, which is the electronic equivalent of the heart pumping blood through the heart into the body, back to the lungs to be oxygenated, and then back into the heart again. Now that is totally amazing. There are actually 40,000 miles of blood vessels there, 40,000 miles of blood vessels in your body. 8 pints of blood. The blood cells are all made in the bone marrow. And the whole thing is, again, irreducibly complex. It couldn't have happened by chance. It couldn't have evolved. The fact is, if your brain does not receive blood for 3 seconds, remember your brain needs oxygen and glucose. If it's a 3-second interval when your brain does not receive glucose or oxygen, you are unconscious. After 3 minutes, you are dead. How long have you got to evolve all this lot? The answer is less than 3 minutes. Over to you, Laura.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's wonderful, sort of showcasing really what God has done.
Yeah.
I think we're ambassadors of God, really. I would say.
Well, I hope.
And it's wonderful actually just to showcase, and I hope viewers actually enjoy what we're bringing, because it showcases the intricacies, the detailed structures that God has put together in ways that work perfectly well together, and different environments. You know, I always say to patients, for instance, when they say they just get some food stuck in their throat, or just aspirate some saliva.
Yes.
Saliva. There's just millimeters between the esophagus and the trachea. There's, right, absolutely next to each other. But the saliva works very well when it goes right down into the esophagus, because there's no with the saliva in our mouths, we don't think, oh, that tastes a bit funny. But get saliva in the trachea, and what does the trachea do? Yeah. It immediately reacts, and it says, "I don't want you there because your pH and what makes you up doesn't suit me." So, cough, cough, cough.
Yes.
And that's just aspiration. And this is our God who's created. And think of having urine anywhere else but in the bladder. And these are all structures that God has placed right next to each other, in their own environment,
yes,
but still working together to make sure everything works in synergy. And it is amazing. It really, really is. It's
totally supernatural.
Totally supernatural.
We're going to come on to the swallowing thing, actually, because you can comment on that when we get there. But it doesn't matter if we don't get to the end of the slides, because it's just proving that God has made an amazing. But let's see the next slide. Actually, that's our respiratory system, and we breathe air in through our nostrils or our mouth into our lungs. Now, our lungs actually are, both of them, about the size of a tennis court, so 2 tennis courts, but if you look on the bottom right, you can see the tiny little air sacs called alveoli. Now, what most people don't know is that those alveoli would collapse if it wasn't for something called a surfactant. To make it simple, I like to call it as a God's fairy liquid, to reduce the surface pressure, or surface tension, I should say. The fact is that God has put God's fairy liquid, or a surfactant, there so that the little alveoli do not collapse. A collapsed lung is very, very serious. In fact, you can't breathe, you'll run out of oxygen very quickly. So the respiratory system is unbelievably complex, but I think the next slide will show you something really important, which actually Dr. Laura just commented on. is that through our mouth, and I know we breathe air, but through our mouth we take in food and oxygen. Now, there's a problem because, as Dr. Law pointed out, we actually take air into our lungs via, on the right, the larynx, which is protected by the vocal cords, which contract very sharply. If you were to inhale a fly, for example, it's extremely unlikely that the fly would end up in your lungs, because as a reflex, as soon as a fly gets past your tonsils, or that part of your mouth, your larynx contracts and stops the fly getting into your lungs. In addition, if you were to every day, we all do this, we drink water, tea, coffee, and we eat food. On the left-hand side, you see a little flap called an epiglottis, which conveniently closes off the opening to the lungs. Now, what are the chances of that evolving? Now, if that epiglottis wasn't there, then of course all the food and all the liquid would go down into our lungs and we'd get aspiration pneumonia and we would die. So what are the chances of that evolving? Well, none. No chance at all. It's irreducibly complex because we must have a larynx with an epiglottis to protect it. Otherwise, we're going to get aspiration pneumonia and we'll die. Laura, over to you.
Well, Genesis 2:19, just to finish off, the Genesis 2:19 says, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." And we've heard so many examples about how God has done so many things with our systems. This program is titled "The Human Body is Miraculous," and it truly is miraculous. I hope you have enjoyed watching, listening, and being excited and hopefully informed by what God has done and how the human body works so well together in synergy, because we have an amazing creative God who's full of imagination, who has created us uniquely, even down to creatures like the hummingbird, but we are so much more intricate and so much more beautifully created than the hummingbird. So you've been watching To The Point with Dr. Law Richardson and Dr. Richard Kent, and do interact with us. We have an email, and that is tothepoint@revelationtv.com, and we'll look forward to bringing you some further facts in the future about the human body, about the way God has created us, championing God because he is worthy to be praised. Look forward to seeing you again some other time. God bless you. Bye for now.